tomorrow to reprogram this discussion because we both like the show because of the things that we want to talk about and we felt like the audience will want to talk about as well. So I'll pass it on to Emma to introduce the speaker. And I would just mention that I'm sure many of you know Emma. Emma is one of the programmers for Flair Festival, but she's also the library manager here. So
that's why we can use this space. So I said it was okay to come in here after hours. Thanks, Aga. So thank you all for coming. When we're programming these post-screening discussions, you never actually know if anyone's going to come to program because there might be another film to go to, but I was hopeful that The Handmaiden would get everyone thinking, and hopefully you've all come to at least listen or maybe participate a little bit in the discussion, hence the semi-informal sharing circle. But I'm really pleased actually we've managed to get an expert on Sarah Waters here tonight, Claire O'Callaghan, whose research focused primarily on Victorian and neo-Victorian literature, women's writing from the 19th century to the present, gender and sexuality, and cultures of austerity. And Claire is, as I've just said, an expert on the writings of novelist Sarah Waters, and as I said in the intro to the film, her book, Sarah Waters' Gender and Sexual Politics, is out now, I believe, from Bloomsbury, so it's definitely one to look up if that's what you're interested in. I think I'm just going to kind of like start straight away with Claire, if that's okay with everyone, and just kind of like, what did you think to that adaptation?
I need a drink.
You need a drink, well, yeah, that's why we won't be, yeah.
No, well, I think I said to you, wowzer was my kind of reaction. Obviously, writing on Waters' books, and I'm very much submerged in the kind of Victorian. So I was really fascinated to be transported to another period, another time, another place. And I think you said in your beginning that opulent, grand setting captures so much of the decadence, and it kind of really lends itself well to Briar and the world that she kind of creates, that kind of Victorian London scene. Beautifully done. Maybe not so happy about all the representations that are perhaps going on in it. I feel like I need time to digest a lot of that actually. I was quite taken by how much violence there was in it. That is kind of present in Waters' novel, but not always brought out. There's definitely, particularly I think in Maud's narration and her part of the story, the second part of the novel, we have quite an extended history of the kind of abuse that she suffered to make her into this kind of secretary to her dastardly uncle and his work. And this adaptation has really amplified that and amplified a really kind of sexual violence undertone to it that's not present in Waters' novel other than through Ward's exposure to pornography. So I was quite taken by the multiple effects of sexual violence that were faced in those women.
Is anyone else thoughts on? I mean, how many of us here have read the original novel?
Which one is it?
It's Fingersmith, yeah. And there's obviously the BBC adaptation that was already filmed about 10, 15 years ago. We're all kind of like, some of us have seen that and not. So I suppose, when I first saw The Handmaiden, I watched it in the London Film Festival last year, and massive fan of Waters' work, Fingersmith, possibly my favourite book and favourite adaptation on the BBC. And I remember when I was watching the film first, and I was like, wow, did he just like watch the BBC and then copied every single scene and just kind of transposed it to a different setting, and then the violence kicked in, and then the ultra sexuality and eroticism kicked in, and I thought, no, this was definitely not in the original work as much as I could remember it from having read it years before. So I suppose I'm interested to hear from your point of view, because you've looked at the adaptations before, is it how do adaptations of literary works kind of happen anyway from a kind of academic point of view? Would you say that previous adaptations of Sarah Waters' work have been quite true to her original work, and then this is a big leap, or?
So out of her, she's written 6 books so far, and 4 of those have been adapted so far for the small screen. And obviously this is the kind of first big screen, and of course Tipping the Velvet's not only had the small screen, but it's also had the stage, and so has the Night Watch has also been adapted for the stage as well. And I understand that there was another production of Fingersmith on stage in Canada, but I'm actually completely ignorant of that. Waters is really generous when she talks about the adaptations of her work. She's kind of very much, gives it over to the writer, gives it over to the producers. And I mean, she uses this wonderful metaphor. She says, it gives birth to its own life, which is very, very nice, very, very creative. However, I think some of the things that her works are really invested in, particularly around the celebration of queer identities, a real mixture of representations of women in particular, and I noticed the kind of little gay subplot in Fingersmith is slightly removed from this adaptation. I'm not 100% happy with the fact that I think a lot of the time her stuff has not been adapted well for the screen in terms of looking at it from a feminist perspective, looking at it from a queer perspective. It's great, and I think it's particularly with Tipping the Velvet, great to see lesbians on screen, prime time TV, and a really kind of frank and true kind of expression of the kind of sex that happens in the text and the real kind of fun of that novel. Particularly when you think about some of the kind of broader narratives around I guess queer stories that we're kind of used to, kind of tragic ones, ones where it kind of is quite miserable, ends quite sad. So Waters is Tipping the Velvet, and then the adaptation really brought that to life. However, there's always been with her adaptations a kind of heterosexualising of those plots. Particularly, I think, with and one of the things I've written about quite a bit is she has quite a lot of masculine women in her novels. She has a lot of women who embrace different kinds of male aesthetics and butchness, different kinds of lesbian representation, and that's always sanitised. Probably, I think, to make it palatable for a mainstream audience, possibly to make it palatable for a heterosexual male audience who want to do that thing of seeing lesbians on screen that Fingersmith is so concerned about. So there's always a kind of, I think this adaptation really did stay, despite the kind of transport of settings and time, did stay true to a lot of the plot. But again, I think it's probably guilty in that way of entirely co-opting the kind of lesbians for a screen, really.
Yeah.
And that sounds really dour, and I don't want to kind of diminish it in that way, but I think that some of the sexual setups and the sexual scenes are done slightly differently in the text, and of course it's words rather than screen. But when Tipping the Velvet, the original adaptation, was aired, for example, I don't know if people ever saw it the first time round. You might remember the Sun, the good old Sun newspaper tabloid. It was been screened and aired on the same night that there was, I think it was an England international football game, and the Sun helpfully printed a list for all its male heterosexual readers at the time you could switch over to get the lesbian bits from the show. Wow. And so you think, in a way, this is obviously a problem, but it's a problem when you think about at what points do works like this, can they ever escape kind of that level of corruption by a heterosexual audience?
And that's
what lesbian text.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's what I think was so intriguing and why we wanted to programme this talk after it, is the fact that we're at a queer film festival. It doesn't mean that everybody who makes a film has to be queer to get into the festival, or even, we never put that kind of, there's not a box you tick or anything like you've got to be queer to be in the festival. But with Park Chan-wook, here we're watching this film that's by a straight male director, and it's very interested and clearly eroticises the lesbian sex to the point of the point of view shots really confused me in this film. I don't know if anyone else has got anything they want, or is she just going to let us talk? That's fine. Discussion part will come in a minute from all of you, but they really confused me in this film, because I was kind of thinking, I watch a lot of gay films, queer films, lesbian films for my job, and the majority are made by women, and the majority queer women, and I was like, would a queer woman have directed that film that way? And I don't know. I don't know if anyone wants to pick that up, and then why does it bother me that it's a man that's done it? Because I actually think the scenes are beautiful, and I just watched that for, like I said, the second time, and I was only going to kind of pop in at the beginning and just because I'm dead on my feet. It's day 6. I've not had a day off for ages, but I just got sucked back in because it's a beautiful story and the soundtrack is amazing and like you say, the costumes and the visuals, and it really does do justice to that life that is created in the novel.
Yeah, that very isolated world, that very kind of creepy underworld is really kind of, I think that's really captured.
Yeah. And so why is it such a problem that it's a man directing that, and would a woman do the same? And I suppose that's just the thought that I've got with it, and I haven't really gotten much further than being bothered that it's for a male gaze, but at the same time appreciating the fact that there's this film that's been made out there, and yeah.
It's interesting. I mean, when Tipping the Velvet was adapted for the stage, I think that was probably last year. I don't know if anyone got to see it on in Hammersmith. That was probably one of the only adaptations of Waters' work where I think actually there wasn't a co-option. And actually, one of the things that the kind of Laura Wade adapted it for the stage, and one of the things she really did was actually to kind of, like the text really, reclaim a lot of lesbian sexuality and lesbian kind of eroticism. And she'd done that by putting into this narrative, placing the whole thing on a musical stage and having like a commentator, a male commentator, whose voice it was to be that kind of girlish lad, ogling Nancy, Kitty at all the key moments and during the audience up to, oh yeah, you're going to get a bit more of an eyeful. But at the points at which it became, in that last part of the book, when it becomes this kind of serious love story, serious romance, and actually Florence and Nancy get together, you see Nancy actually going, I've heard you doing this all the way through this play, and you get this knowing discussion between them, and she kind of kicked him off stage, and kind of really cleverly done, kind of saying, no, I don't want your voice here, I want, this is about us here. So I think there's creative ways to do this, but it's a dilemma, isn't it? What do you do? Because you want to see stuff on screen, and you want to see it artfully done, beautifully done. And I agree, I think some of the scenes were incredible, but at the same time, I couldn't help but worry about some of them.
Yeah, I mean, I've done research and highlighted on an interview, and this is an interview that was done with the director, and obviously some of the early reviews that came out. And a lot of female reviewers were arguing, is this just a film solely intended for men to go and see and get pleasure and get pleasure from? It was so one of the questions was, I'm not sure who this was intended for. Was this actually choreographed potentially for a male eye? And they're talking about the sex scenes in particular there. And the director does kind of. It's quite an interesting response. He says, when it's presented to me as an issue of a male gaze, I cannot deny that I myself am male, but I have to say that I made effort so this film won't be seen as a film that is made for the male eyes. So I don't know what we all think of that. Yeah, go on.
Oh, I was just going to say, to me, the awareness of that comes from how much of a mockery he makes of the men when they are being seen to be viewing sexual content. I think in doing that, he kind of deals with some of the issues that there are. I think I, too, had some of those kind of questions when I was watching it about representation and whether or not it should be done in such a way, but I try and ask myself if that's my perspective as a queer woman feeling defensive over it. And if I was a queer director, I would hope that I'd be able to direct straight stories and no one called to question that, but I assume they wouldn't because depression. So that was just my
that's absolutely.
I think it's partly a problem of narrative perspective, isn't it? Because we have the second part is told from the perspective of the other character. And in film, in order to focalise on a character, we would normally show their face. Especially if it's to show this is the same scene from the perspective of two characters. So when I mix up both their names, but when the maid runs into the bedroom and they've had this fight, in order to show we're now seeing it from the perspective of the lady, we see the lady's face. Now, obviously, it would be an option just to show the room and to show the door shutting. But I don't know if that flip of narrative perspective would then be fully communicated. But in order to show what literature would do with interior monologue, film shows a face, doesn't it? Or it might show what's being seen, but we also need the reverse shot.
Yeah, when I was watching it, I was intrigued by the way that he had filmed it in the 3 parts, and also the first part was so long, and you really get kind of like sucked into this false sense of, oh, I remember this from the book, I remember this from the adaptation, and obviously you know what the twist is coming up, but cannily he creates a brand new twist, which I actually think works better than the original twist. Actually, no, better's not the right. That's not the right word, because I'm not criticising Waters' original work at all. It's just in a weird way, it's a more empowering twist for the women in The Handmaiden. Does anyone else think that? Have I just offended every Sarah Waters fan in the room?
Honestly, forgot.
I just made a comment. I saw it at the film festival, went away and read the book.
Yeah.
And I made 2 comments of things that come up. One is the way he filmed it. A lot of the shots are fairly static, very wide, using the wide screen. And I think some of the sex scenes have that same structure. Yes, there are the reverse shots to get the who the prime exponent of that part is. The other thing, you talked about there being less violence. I found the book, especially the scene in the asylum, distressingly violent. And some of the later scenes at the end of the book, when she's back in Southwark, were again quite viciously brutal. And the description of the way it ends, the stabbing at the end. So it's a different sort of violence, but I think they're on about a level.
Yeah, for me the violence in that was purely the way in which, so in the original novel, one of the things about the character that's the Count in this, who's called Gentleman in the book, one of the things about that in the novel is that he's meant to be gay. And so he makes it clear from the start he's not interested in those women, whereas in this, that's left so kind of seductively ambiguous that he kind of says, I'm not interested in this, I'm interested in money. But then when he gets the chance, there's that almost, it could become in a rape scene. And that for me, I was kind of like, whoa, that changes that dynamic here. This changes that relationship between the women working. And it also, of course, misses the kind of gay presence, I guess. I was going to say with your point, actually, one of the things that that did strike me is in part of, for me, one of the things that Fingersmith is very much about is we, like Sue, enter this world thinking Maud is this innocent and that she's not knowledgeable about sex or anything else. And what we're kind of part of Waters' unveiling of the illusion is that Maud is knowledgeable, is that she's read all of this heterosexual pornography, but she has a line where she says, it's like I knew everything, but I knew nothing. And what she doesn't know is she doesn't know what it means to love a woman, and she doesn't know what sex with another woman is like, or what kissing another woman is like. And so we kind of have this layer in the novel where part of that relationship and the destroying of all the work that takes place in the library and all that stuff is actually all of the reclaiming. It's all of that reclaiming.
Actually, it was sorry to interrupt. I was like, oh my god, do it.
But it is all about that kind of taking back the kind of, or really Maud kind of fleshing out everything she thought she knew about sex, which has been in her uncle's world. The character that's the bookseller is based on a real figure. I don't know how many of you know that. So a real Victorian man, a connoisseur of pornography, who collected vast amounts of heterosexual pornography, and Waters based it on this guy who basically wanted to catalogue all the heterosexual porn. Well, no, actually all porn he could find, but he was primarily interested in heterosexual porn. And part of basing it on him is that, Waters is kind of saying, hang on a minute, this is, what about lesbian pornography? What about sex between women? Where does it feature? And kind of taking it back a little bit. And I know actually I've heard her interviewed before where she said one of the scenes she wanted to write in, and I wonder whether the director knew this, was that she had originally intended a scene where Maud did go and destroy the library. In this adaptation, it was the other character, it was the Suki character who was doing all the destroying, and she just threw a bit of ink on it. And I was thinking, get a knife and slash that stuff, if that's the unfolding of her kind of anger at that point. But I thought it was interesting, Waters had that scene in mind and then cut it from the book. because she didn't want to take the violence that far. She wanted it to be a bit more symbolic about that kind of destroying heterosexual ideas of lesbian sex.
And that's really, I'm trying to kind of like form so many thoughts, and now I'm just thinking about of a library being destroyed while I'm sat in my library.
I was thinking it's quite apt we're in here.
I know, I know. That's just where so much of the film is in the library. But we don't do that in this library, by the way. That's not actually, even though we do have the feminist porn book on display right now. It's a completely different thing. I suppose the other thing with The Handmaiden and watching it a second time, I'm still unsure, is like where my empathy and sympathy lies. Like, I don't know if any of you are familiar with, very familiar with film studies or whatever, but there's lots written about how different, how audiences are, their empathy is provoked, and there's different, techniques, and there's a whole genre of looking into this, and I'm sat there and I just don't know. I don't know. It's kind of like I'm kind of on Suki's side, and then actually I'm on Hidiko's side, and more watching it the second time, because you just get it's sunk in a little bit more the second time, but it's kind of like she is in such an oppressed state. Like, she is, like you've already said, she's got the world of this like erotica, she's reading it, but she has no sense of her own self, no sense of her own sexuality, no sense of her own sexuality. And I get the sense that she's a little bit older than Suki. I don't know or maybe that's just my putting my own, thoughts and narrative onto it. And I don't know, where I'm going. If anyone else wants to jump in and kind of like, are they equal in your minds? Do they need to be equal? Did we want them actually to fail at the end? Did you want one of them to just turn around and say, I don't know, anyone?
Did your sympathies change in the different parts?
Yeah.
So in the first part, was your sympathy all to do with the
lady, because we knew that she was getting set up.
Yeah. And then because I hadn't read the book before I came to see the film, so it was all new to me.
Oh, great! Well, that's interesting.
And so I was interpreting it as I was going along and thinking.
Yeah.
I think what helped me to enjoy it, I really enjoyed the movie.
Yeah, that's probably what I should have said. But I really loved the film.
the colour timing and the costumes, and the attention to detail in the scenery. It wasn't just a couple of people, like some woman having a bath and someone else just helping her have a bath. The detail of the period and setting the scene and making what looked like a big bright open room seemed like a really intimate, because have you noticed that there was no music and sound or any sounds in the background apart from the rustling of clothes or water, and I was completely drawn in, and it wasn't until somebody else in the room, in the theatre, sniffed that I was broken out of being totally drawn into the way.
And in many ways, it's actually quite a small. I mean, it feels like a small film in many ways, because the cast is it's a small.
But there aren't that many individual. You come back to the same rooms for different things.
Exactly.
So you always see the library, you always see the bedroom.
Yeah.
And it's only towards the end of the movie when it's kind of more to do with the escape that you're then given more scenery to look at, and leading the viewer into the illusion that their life is progressing outside of their little world of the house. I thought the house is beautiful.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I don't know.
Want to live there.
Yeah. The program copy for it in LFF last year. I remember Kate Taylor, who programmed it, wrote this amazing thing about just you'll die for the wallpaper or something. The wallpaper's die for. And, it's like, and I actually made a point of looking at the wallpaper tonight, because obviously I could concentrate on different things. I was like, oh yeah, it's really nice. But I mean, actually, I think what you were saying about the no sound and the kind of like drawing you into just the detail in the scenes. I think that serves to pull you into their feelings more and their.
Well, a really good example of the way the cinematography changed the allegiance in the scene.
Yeah.
So where the lady and the gentleman were both simultaneously painting the maid. So that in scene 1, you don't see anything of what they're painting.
No.
And the angst is all about the maid's nervousness at observing flirtatious behaviour. But the second time round, when it really made me smile, was you got to watch him painting beautiful, and then hers was crazy. But then the symbolism of rubbing the eyes out with a pencil, saying, "I don't want you to see this," which was really sweet.
And actually, that's one of the things. Sorry, it was actually really funny in parts as well.
Yeah. I hadn't expected that at all to be the case. I did not come into the film screening thinking there was going to be funny parts, but there were some really clever moments of punctuated with lightness that kind of brought you back a little bit.
And I can't remember if that was the case watching it in LFF.
Over on the pop-up in the LFF,
Yeah.
where I saw it, there wasn't as much laughter in the
No,
audience.
exactly.
But it was a bar of an environment. I do feel that 51 is a little bit more intimate than
It's the
places.
best screen in London, darling. But you're right. I don't recall there being as much laughter. So that makes me think when it's with a queer audience, our sensibilities are different, and that's the other interesting thing that I think would be good to talk about and get to, is that we bring something to it that others don't.
Well, do you think a straight Do you think a straight audience would watch it for the sex scenes? Would they find enjoyment in the sex scenes as opposed to the perspective of the characters?
Well, that's an interesting question. Let's pick that up. But
in terms of perspective,
Yeah.
I was just thinking about how also our perspective is arguably the one of the sadists, because you're talking about the the beauty of the house, and this is something, of course, that he's constructed, and also the the way we're sort of invited into spaces and sort of doors opening, like curtains opening in the cinema, and just this way that we're sort of guided into his space, and we're sort of invited very much to enjoy it. Also the basement, and then also how on that note, some of the sex scenes really do resemble his books. So we're looking kind of with maybe a statistic eye as well. I don't know.
that's I hadn't thought of that, and that's maybe briefing call again. Think of the film.
I was just saying the final scene seemed like a pretty clear commitment to saying we're really complicit. Because I hadn't noticed it as much. I kind of got caught up in a narrative for the rest of the film, but suddenly it pulls back completely, and you have this sort of it felt much more posed and structured than the sex scenes earlier on in the film, and suddenly got this. It suddenly felt like we're here. I'm showing you I'm complicit in recreating all the scenes from the books right here in the final scene, and this is my. It felt like he was sort of acknowledging that the absurdity of the male gaze, maybe. But
I think there was also an element of kind of, because I sort of read it that way as well, being like, that was the one that made me feel a bit sort of, because it was referencing an earlier scene out of one of the books. But I suppose you could also read it as kind of them jokingly, like, saying we're reclaiming this act which has been sort of heterosexualized over and over again. Because in the book, there's like a weird blurring at the end, doesn't she? She starts writing choreographies, not the maid, the other one. And it's kind of a weird like tension of you hated this and you hated books, and now she's kind of reverted back to it. But it's also a way of reclaiming that act, which she also found quite disturbing to begin with.
Yeah, coming back to the fact that the book, it's a male director. It reminds me very much of a film by male directors, Bound, which is very similar to me in the sense there were solidarity between two women. They work against gangsters, mafia, or against gangsters, and this kind of solidarity. I think it's more than just that they are in a lesbian relationship, or it's something different. But it's a kind of relationship which is
which goes beyond the male gaze. They are joking, or they make fun of it.
Yeah.
They use their strategies against them.
Yeah.
And this is very important. in this
Yeah, I think that's where I'm getting to with this film. I think when I first watched it, I was very angry at the film because I felt like it was just yet again taking lesbian sexuality and representing it for the male gaze. And then the more and more I've thought about it, and we chatted a lot about that scene at the end, and that was the one scene when, you know, we debated it, and I went with a few of my queer friends to the screening in the majority straight cinema, and yeah, we debated, like, what does that last scene mean? Is it a reaction against all that's gone before, and is it also the declaration of love, and is it all, you know, everything that we've just discussed? And I think, yeah, where I'm getting to now and seeing it a second time, it's beyond the male gaze, it's more than that.
Yeah, and that's actually something that's echoed in the original novel.
Yeah.
I mean, that first time we have, in the original novel, it's Sue and her perspective, and like I said, you think this is an innocent scene where she's teaching Maud, as the character is, this heterosexual act for her wedding night.
Yeah.
But of course we then find out that actually Maud's way knowledgeable, and she's actually set up the whole thing, and she's used the script, that really kind of classic script of show me what's done, kind of, you know, for two women to end up together. So there's a sense in which those two earlier scenes are kind of very, very contrived, deliberately playing with ideas of the male gaze and how lesbian sex is. And then, as you mentioned at the end, when Sue goes back and she sees Maud writing, Maud, of course, has begun to carve out a career for herself as a pornographer. And there's been a bit of debate, really, about the kind of, why would she do that? I think you alluded to, why would she do that? Why would she, be doing this thing that she's hated? Waters puts in a line where, because Sue can't read, she says, read what I'm writing, and Sue can't do it. So Waters puts in a line that says, she began to show me the words she'd written one by one, which suggests that it's lesbian pornography. It's pornography made by women for women. And in that way, it's a really clever way of thinking about the origins, kind of reimagining the origins of lesbian pornography way before heterosexual pornography co-opted it, that we've got this woman who's learnt all this stuff but actually is then using it for herself and using it to write pornography about sex with women independent of men. And of course she's claimed her the seat there. And I think that was kind of echoed a little bit in the film, that in that last scene, they're having sex, and there is a sense in which it's entirely staged cinematically, but it's meant to be that kind of intimate, they're doing what they want on their own terms. I think.
Further thoughts on it?
I think the final chapter of the movie, the whole thing looked a lot more staged than the actual the first part, which is heavily reliant on detail.
Yeah.
Everything, like the hotel, when we look out when you're looking at the two windows.
That's a great scene.
That looks very fake in comparison to the first.
Yeah.
Same with the boat.
But that's it. The boat is
and
just
the
so.
final scene, as it cuts out, it looks very, very like unrealistic.
I mean, that scene with the boat and they're having sex, and then you get the waves going and the clouds going. It's like the Earth's moving. We get it. Don't have to show it. Spell it out before we got that the first time around.
Do you think that kind of? Because for me, that kind of feels like, because they have that reveal where it's like, guess what? This actually has all been plotted up by them the whole time. It's kind of purposefully like, look, they staged it, and now this is the end.
Hiding it to accompany the
design. Kind of thing.
Could be.
It transitions straight from there to the wallpaper, so I assume that it means, the whole point is to almost show the illustrative side of it, and almost like, I like your comment that it was sort of recreating the stories from the earlier public films, essentially.
Yeah, I think the last thing is very educational too, because when you think about like sex toys, like you usually think about like dildos and like penis, everything about penis, but then it's very educational that they tell us that in ancient times that sex toys are girls. So I also pick it up from this point. I think like ages ago when I heard that this like the fingersmiths will be adapted by a Korean director. I was excited by fingersmiths.
expecting the lesbian scene. But then when I saw the movie, I think it's truly a touching work.
Yeah.
Because it includes so many things, not only the lesbian queer part, including a lot of like culturally and historically content, and even the very detailed like when they switch from Korean to Japanese, and why that character used Japanese instead of Korean, as well, like a lot of detail which is pretty.
Yeah. Oh yeah, undoubtedly, you know whose film you're watching, and I think that's, like you say, it's a very exciting thing in a way when you find out, when it's like, oh wow, he's going to make a lesbian film, or at least, you know, I was very excited to.
I think he wanted to make like this film more than queer film.
Yeah.
Because he included a lot of like history and the Korean identity, like a lot of like sorority things.
Going back to adaptations that in the past, and obviously they've all been they've stuck quite, there's not been one that's transposed settings unless I've missed one somewhere. I don't know if there's anything more to tease out about this subject, but it just feels, I don't know really where the thought's going, but it just feels like there was something very specific that the director wanted to do with this, and like you say, just maybe it had nothing to do with the fact that there was going to be a lesbian story in it.
That borrow the idea.
Borrow the idea.
I think the more important one that it was set in that period that's Japanese colonized Korea, so that is quite complicated.
Yeah. One of the things I think with or particularly with Waters, I mean, with her period settings, you know, she set stuff in the Victorian period in the 1940s and the 1920s. They're not innocent choices, a bit like you've just been suggesting about the director here. They're very much about, for her, speaking back to omissions and gaps in a kind of queer history, queer archive, and recreating and reimagining what those issues may have looked like, what the representation might look like. And I came to this film really ignorant of anything to do with 1930s queer culture in Korea and those kind of historical tensions. I got more, like you said, about some of the politics and the political tensions around the language than I did maybe about what was the queer culture in that time. But that was perhaps my ignorance. I don't know if other people got more.
Because I think like queer is quite strict upon the gay.
Yeah.
So I think if he didn't make it this way, it couldn't be like released in Korea. Where there's much more in the content, not just lesbian. So the focus is not just lesbian.
Yeah.
Because a pure lesbian film can't be released in Korea.
And I guess then putting it in a historical setting as well kind of removes it from the present. There's like a safe distance between the narratives, really. You know, this was something that could have happened. Perhaps, I don't know.
And there wasn't any part, there was maybe one scene where she alluded to, or maybe this is how I interpreted it, when the gentleman and the lady was chatting to each other, and it was in the second part of the movie, and he was explaining it's all about a Jew, and we'll get a maid to come in, and the lady sort of alluded to the fact that could she be allowed to fall in love with this woman, and he said something along the lines of oh no, you can't do that, that's improper. That was the only reference in the whole movie where there was any sort of, if you like, straight objection to because I like I said, I never read the book, so I would not have guessed that the gentleman was meant to be a gay character.
Yeah, no, I think
he was played straight.
It's quite, that element is
but
quite
that tool wasn't used to then try and be homophobic.
No.
There was no mention. It was like, then again, none of the sexual scenes were observed by a third person, so there was no way to object to what they saw. But there was also none of this. There were other maids at the beginning of the film, other maids in the house, but you never saw the rest of them just wandering around casually.
I wondered that.
Wandering across other scenes and then saying, "Oh, you'll never guess what? There's a couple of lesbians sat
in it. The door was open, wasn't it?
Yeah.
You know what? That really bothered me. That continuity of it. It was like they've not shut the door. I saw the weird details that you kind of like.
Yeah, well, particularly I think when you think about kind of the kind of secrecy and all of that kind of stuff that would have gone with that historically. It kind of that felt a weird moment. I don't know what that was meant to signify either. I feel a bit.
It would have, and it would have signified something. I don't think.
I don't know.
Yeah. Because directors famously say that there's nothing in their films that they've not put there, and they get quite annoyed at film students where at film festivals kind of like, you know, coming out with, oh, my dissertation is on, you know, and they're just like, oh, no, I intended for that scene. You know.
I think this film was insanely well crafted.
It is.
There are so many areas that are just so unbelievably rife with detail.
Yeah.
You're going to spend a long time thinking. Which is great.
I think that's kind of.
I wonder, for me, the one scene that I have questions about is the ending, and I wonder whether it is so well crafted, it is so staged, but for me it took away from the intimacy between the two characters, and I always wonder why he did it at the very end, because I felt the intimacy between the two of them throughout the film, and then the last scene, the ending, just felt just noticing everything around them except for the love between the two of them. So I just wonder whether this, crafting it to the T just...
I felt like it was more like it was a forbidden love before that, and when it became acceptable and permissible, like it suddenly, not the intimacy had gone, but the intense forbidden nature, which I think naturally takes away from some of the I don't know what the word I'm looking for is.
But I guess they were fleeing for freedom. They are finally free.
They can throw their head back. It's the first time sex isn't used as a weapon in the whole, or like as something that's not allowed, like in the whole thing. So all of a sudden, it's not as the shots aren't as close on them because you can give them more space because they can do what they like now. You don't have to be reading tiny.
And the only characters dying in the film are guys.
Yes, which
is very unusual. So. In that sense, it is having that sort of message almost. It's okay. And I have to say, I also like the BDSM, setups of it because it was very realistic and it swapped roles. It wasn't her being the submissive; it was him and the other guys who became under her domination. So I thought that was really good because they could have let it be in a different way.
I think
it's brave. To put it in.
I think he writes women really well. Like if you've seen his other films, he's very interested in women and the power that they can have, and also how power is taken away from them. And he said that he co-writes all his films, even the Hollywood ones with a female co-writer. So it's and he just that's how he makes films. So there's obviously I don't want to say there's a feminine voice there, but there is obviously he doesn't shy away from it. It can be a brave decision to flip those roles and show men as submissive and show men dying rather than...
So even though that count wasn't counted for as gay, I definitely sort of would put him as a, I would say, not call it a strong male character, because he was also giving space and kind of talking about something when he was young, things happened. So kind of also a little bit asexual,
And he wasn't castrated, was he?
That was,
So not so pushy, so
I had to duck out of that bit. That's when I left. I was like, I couldn't.
No, but he didn't. He wasn't.
That's
the
When
he died with his cock
So we think, anyway.
Yeah, he says.
Just thinking about the male gaze and the male director versus female or lesbian director, and I'm mentally trying to compare with Below the Mouth, which we saw at the weekend, and whether there was anything in the way the sexual scenes were shot or framed or anything that is different. And I'm not coming up with anything, but that's
it's
what's
not going to
turning
be
around in my
about
mind.
that, is it? Like, it's not going to be like, oh, are the shots from a different... It's not going to be like, oh, do we get more worm's eye view shots or something? It's not about framing.
So how do you define what is it about what Park did that is slightly irritating?
Well, I guess it's because he's a male director, and I guess there is a fundamental thing that I'm kind of like have to...
So you're not seeing anything, you're thinking something?
Yeah.
But you're coming from a lesbian perspective or a male gaze perspective?
I'm just trying to understand what the difference might be, because I can't see it between the two films.
I think one of the issues with this is also to do with Sarah Waters, the fact that she's such a loved lesbian novelist, that for a male director to take lesbian novel by this probably one of the most loved lesbian novelists of all time, it's going to be subject to that kind of criticism, I think. And I guess I think you're right. There's one of the issues I've always had with the line, and I'll argue it, and I've never been quite been able to resolve it in my head, is at what point can you stop that kind of critique? You know, you can't stop male directors, male writers from doing that. You wouldn't want to be that kind of punitive about get off our stuff. But at the same time, like you say, there is a kind of, I guess, you can't lose that frame of reference that there is that kind of, particularly with a Waters novel, I think, that strong lesbian celebration that you immediately are going to compare it to the gays, the male representation of lesbians on screen, and what that means, maybe more broadly.
I think like there. Sorry, I'm just devil's advocate again. I think there is something to be said for an international author taking an otherwise not elevated to that level story and making a lesbian story so well viewed. Like it did surprisingly well, and like gay films are a commercial challenge from a production perspective, and like so I think there's a lot to be said for someone utilising their privilege to display something, and even though there is an inherent viewpoint that is inescapable, being a man, there is something to nod to.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think just in his own words, again in this interview, he said it was never intended to fulfil some sort of male voyeuristic pleasure. I tried to make sure that wasn't the case when he was making it. And the other thing that he says about the film, and I just had it and I lost it, he talks about the reasons for wanting to make the film, and the first thing he says is, I'm a firm believer that the characters of Suki and Hideki, so Maud and Sue in the novel, they fell in love at first sight. That's the romantic notion that I have about the two characters' relationship, and that's, you know, what he concentrated on, and that's where the story began from. So it's kind of, I'm warming to it more as a film, and actually seeing it a second time, that's the other thing. I mean, did everybody like it? I mean, are we sitting uncomfortably about what we think about it? Or I was doing that thing as kind of like, will this go on my old-fashioned DVD shelf? It's old-fashioned now. Everyone downloads everything. I still buy books. You know, I was like thinking, will this go on my lesbian DVD shelf, which is quite big? And I was like thinking, I think it will. I don't know. Anyone else? I think, you know, is this gonna like sit next to Bound and Carol and
might go on my foreign language.
Foreign language show.
Yeah. This is also my second time watching it.
Okay.
And I have to say, when I watched it the first time, which was last year, I felt like the middle part was a bit flat. It was a bit repetitive, even though the perspectives change. There's that lull in the middle. But this time, second time, maybe because I'm more familiar with it, the movie kind of felt a bit more compact and just flowed a lot.
I agree.
A lot better. Yeah. And also this really subtle kind of details which, as with any movies, you kind of miss. But what I noticed was when they've escaped and met the Count, and they're in the car, I think, and the lady's watching outside the window. Like, she's got that really kind of weird gaze where she looks very innocent, that first part, and she turns around and she's got like a red patch on her forehead because she's been leaning on the window. Then you realise that everything was an act. That's just, you know, that's the detail which I missed, and I really enjoy that kind of immense microscopic detail. How that person is acting.
At the beginning of the movie, along that kind of picking up a small detail, there was a throwaway line about the electricity goes once in a while, and I thought, what's the point of telling me that? And then later, when she's reading the story to all these men, there was a power shift. So it was subjugated woman
Yeah.
Reading an erotic story to men. Then when the lights went out, she switched into her inner self, and she was savouring being a character in the book, and as she's speaking the story, she's imagining it herself because she can no longer see the book from the people in front of her. And then the lights come back on again, and suddenly she's thrown back in the room. And I thought that the pat on the cheek thing was a...
Oh, yeah, no, absolutely. And you're right, it's details like that that definitely you pick up on more of them the second time around. I don't know, if anyone got any more closing remarks? We've talked our almost hour away.
But I really liked it.
Great, yeah. Did I do okay programming that one?
It was a very good film.
Do not need that, but thank you for that.
And thank you for programming this discussion, because
well,
it's opened up a whole load of more thoughts for me about the film and about the book, and all I've got to do is read the rest of them.
I'm really glad so many people came along. Aga and I were kind of like, we really want to do this because we had so many questions about the film ourselves, but we were like, sometimes we thought, oh, we're just going to be two of us talking to Claire. But I'm so happy that you all came along and participated and enjoyed, and there's still more to see in the festival, but I'm not sure anything's going to be talked about quite as much as that one that we've got coming up. But thank you all for joining in. I think you all deserve that.